people cope with and overcome life's challenges. This is Life Transformations with Michael Hart, certified Christian counselor and director of Ottawa's Elam Counselling Services.
Hi, this is Michael Hart, director of Elam Counselling Services, and I want to thank you for listening to this edition of the Life Transformation radio show. If you're not familiar with Elam Counselling Services, we are a Christian counseling service located in Ottawa, that's Ottawa, Ontario, and we provide professional psychotherapy from a Christian perspective for a wide range of mental health and relationship issues. You can find out more about us at elamcounselingministry.com. Elam is spelled E-L-I-M, counseling with 2 L's, ministry.com. You can also call us at 613-699-1677. Again, 613-699-1677. A very common question that I get from callers who have called me after almost every show is to ask about whether or not our services are covered by insurance providers. The answer to that is yes. The majority of the major insurance companies do cover the services that we offer, and we give an insurance receipt so that you can claim for the services that you pay. I also get asked about the qualifications of the counselors that we have at Elam. The counselors that we have at Elam are professional counselors who are with the Canadian Counselling and Psychotherapy Association, and the counselors that we have at Elam are trained in, especially in incorporating spirituality with psychology. And yes, we do have a female counselor on staff as well for those of you out there with issues that you may prefer to speak with a female counselor about. So I thought I would address those issues at the start of the show. And as usual, we have another interesting show lined up for you today. Today we are talking about compulsive gambling. And if you're dealing with that issue, either you or a family member, you'd want to stay tuned for this show, because we'll be dealing with a number of practical steps that can be taken to help you dealing with that very difficult situation. And as usual, with me in studio today is the one and only Melissa Wagot. Welcome again, Melissa.
Hi, Michael. It's great to be back. Mm-hmm. So as you said, we're talking about compulsive gambling or gambling addiction today. Mm-hmm. And for many of our listeners out there, they've probably heard, whether it's on a self-help show or from other counseling services, one of the things when you have an addiction, whatever it may be, one of the first steps in getting help and getting better is recognizing you have an addiction and acknowledging that fact. So to help our listeners know what gambling addiction is or compulsive gambling, could you describe the signs and symptoms that are associated with this disorder?
Okay, there are certain criteria that are necessary for a person to be diagnosed with a gambling disorder. And the DSM-5, which is a diagnostic manual for mental disorder, talks about there has to be four of 9 criteria possible, of the 9 criteria for a person to be diagnosed with a gambling disorder. So I'll just quickly read through the 9 criterias, and if any of these 4 is present, then it's possible that your loved one or you could be suffering from a gambling disorder. So get your pens out if you want to make a note of some of these. So the first is, if number 1, there is a need to gamble with increasing amount of money in order to achieve the desired excitement. So for gamblers, we find that they would start off with small amounts, and then over time they gradually increase the amount. And we also find that the amount that they gamble become larger amounts with time. Number 2, the second criteria is that the person is restless or irritable when attempting to cut down or stop gambling. If you are dealing with a family member who you have talked to about stopping their gambling or decreasing their gambling, then maybe you can identify with that they become irritable at you and they're resisting any attempt to get them to stop the gambling behavior. The third criteria is that the person has made despite repeated unsuccessful efforts to control, cut back, or stop gambling. The fourth criteria is that a person is often preoccupied with gambling. So a person who has a gambling disorder will spend a lot of time even on the internet seeking out means, forms of gambling where they can experience that kind of high or excitement that they get from gambling. Number 5 is that often gamblers, when feeling distressed, a person often gambles when feeling distressed, example, helpless, guilty, anxious, or depressed. So a lot of time there are emotional issues at play here where a person turns to gambling as a way of dealing with those issues. The 6th criteria is that a person after losing money returns another day to get even. So there is this feeling that they're chasing the big win, and they're going back over and over to recuperate loss. And then the 7 criteria is that a person lies to conceal the extent of involvement with gambling. 8, the person has jeopardized or lost a significant relationship, job, or education or career opportunity because of gambling. And 9, the person relies on others to provide money to relieve desperate financial situation caused by gambling. So notice here that I've just outlined 9 different criteria. So as I said earlier, if a person has 4 or more of these criteria, then it's possible that you or your family members dealing with a gambling disorder.
Mm-hmm. And the hopes for us through this show is to describe these criteria a bit further and hopefully give people some useful tools for either themselves or the people they're loving who may be going through this so that they can get the help that they need and hopefully break this addiction. Mm-hmm. So in your Kingdom Life workshops related to gambling, you've described 4 phases of someone who is involved in compulsive gambling. Mm-hmm. Could you go into those 4 phases in a little bit more detail?
Well, the 4 phases, as outlined by the Illinois Institute for Addiction and Recovery, is that the first phase is the winning phase, where a person starts gambling and they often have a big win, or they have some winnings that encourage them to repeat the behavior. The second phase is the losing phase, where the person has gone back but the winning hasn't been repeated. And they keep gambling as a way of hoping that they'll get back a taste of that first winning. It's possible that they will have winnings every now and then that kind of encourages them to continue behaving. But the overall losing phase, what that means is that they're losing significantly more money than they're winning. But the whole gambling mechanism is set up by the companies that run these gambling places, or these places that encourage people to gamble, that they will give you a certain amount of winning to encourage you to keep trying. So it's as if when you have you win a small amount, the feeling is, I did win, even though it's only $20 and I have lost $10,000. Maybe if I keep trying, I'll win again. So the person gets stuck in this losing phase where they're losing significantly more amount of money than they're winning. And this leads to the third phase, which is the desperation phase, where the person realizes that they are now in a crisis state. Their credit cards have been maxed out. Their accounts have been drained. And their spouse or other family members are now noticing that money is disappearing and there is a crisis developing. The person may even lose their job because they're realizing that the employer is realizing that the person is taking more and more time away from work, even gambling on the computer at work. So, or the person get divorced because they have spiraled their family into financial bankruptcy, and the other spouse, as in desperation, has moved away. So the desperation phase is where the person gets into real problem as a result of their behavior. And then we have the final phase, which is the hopeless phase. So in this phase, the person kind of hit rock bottom. It's the rock bottom phase where a person gets to where their things are hopeless. They can't sink any further. And some gamblers may even attempt suicide in this phase. But for a lot of gamblers, it is when they hit this hopeless phase that they realize that they need to do something about changing their compulsion to gamble.
So we've described what someone who has a gambling addiction looks like and some of the signs you may see and the phases they go through.
Right.
And when you describe those phases, the desperation phase and the hopeless phase, it makes me wonder, why do people gamble in the first place? Like when you hear these stories of someone hitting rock bottom, losing everything, what's the incentive to get involved in the first place?
Well, there's a certain excitement that is tied to risk. Whenever there is a risk involved with an activity, there's an excitement element. And so a person who starts gambling first might start just out of curiosity or out of fun, and there's an excitement because you're putting money at risk, and the excitement may even be heightened by the fact that you did come away that first time with winning a large sum of money. And so from that excitement, the brain is being conditioned that gambling equal excitement. So the person, as a result of that wiring of the brain, keeps going back time and time again to have that excitement. For people who have compulsive gambling addictions, a lot of times it is also tied to an escape from reality, a way of not dealing with underlying emotional issues or major issues in their lives that are too painful for them to face. So instead of facing the fact that they are going through a crisis in their marriage, gambling becomes a way of escape, because when they're gambling, they don't have to deal with that fact. Now, the sad reality of gambling is that it spirals, it sometimes magnifies these other issues. So it's a way of escape. It's a way of finding that excitement, and for some people it's a way of escaping boredom. It gives them something to do. A lot of times it starts as a social engagement where a person is socializing with other people or friends as they're gambling, and so people get hooked as a result of those. So if you have just joined us, you're listening to the Life Transformation Radio Show, and I'm your host, Michael Hart of Elam Counselling Services, and with me in studio today is Melissa Wagat, and we are discussing today compulsive gambling.
Do you ever see, we were just discussing why some people get involved in gambling. Do you ever see sometimes people getting involved because they have money problems to begin with? So it's kind of a, get me out of this situation, maybe I can have that big win. Do you see that as well?
That can be sometimes what's behind it to some extent, because if there's been an experience of winning where a person realized, I put $100 and I went to the casino, I put $100 and I came away with $2,000, there is a tendency that if a person might feel, I'm in debt, I have to pay off these credit cards, I have to pay off my student loan, and maybe if I just put $1,000, I'll get $10,000 the next time. And so yes, that can be a lure where a person will feel that gambling is a way of getting out of debt. But I remember the voice of one of my professors that said over and over to us as we studied this, that a gambler never wins. And you would keep repeating that, a gambler never wins. And you would look at that statement and say, of course a gambler wins at times, but I guess what he was trying to inculcate on our brain is that when you gamble, there is such an attachment to the process that develop, whereby you will be lured and attracted into going back, so that even the amount that you win will become insignificant to the amount that you lost. It's really a sad thing, Melissa, but there are some clients that I see that have come in that they have mortgaged their houses to deal with in order to provide funds to gamble, because they have maxed out their credit cards, they have maxed out their credit line, and they need more money to gamble to get out of all of those debts. So they mortgage their house, and then they end up losing their house as well, because as my professor said, a gambler never wins.
So when you're interacting with clients, or as you describe, their gamblers never win, why does it seem, though, that some people are more prone to gambling than others? Some people can go pick up one lotto ticket and it's no big deal, or play a game of cards and that's the end of it. Why do others seem to get trapped in this compulsive gambling cycle?
That's quite a good question, Melissa, because that's what you have said is quite correct. There are many people who will gamble from time to time. They will go to the casino, they will have fun, and that's it. They don't have the lure to go back over and over and over again. So it is believed that for people who become addicted, not just to gambling, but to anything, that there is underlying emotional wounds that predispose the person to use gambling as a kind of escape or a kind of a process medication for whatever it is that is unpleasant in their lives that they haven't dealt with. So studies that have been done with addicts, for example, there's a professor, not a professor, a psychologist out of Vancouver called Matty Gabor, and he does extensive work with abuse victims. And what he has found out is that 99.9% of the people that he sees who are addicted to drugs, they have significant abuse history in their past, significant abuse in their past. So it's believed that people who become addicted, there are underlying emotional wounds that haven't been dealt with.
So if someone out there is listening maybe, and they're hearing what we're talking about today, and they've heard the DSM criteria, and they're getting that picture of a loved one in their mind, or maybe they're getting a picture of themselves, what are some do's and don'ts for interacting with someone who has a gambling addiction? What steps should they be taking, and what things should they be avoiding?
One of the main problem a lot of times that I see in families where there is a gambler who is caught in this trap, they become compulsive gamblers, and they're spiraling the family into financial disaster, is that a lot of time there is a spouse who is also enabling the gambling behavior. And this is not something that is done intentionally. It's just that the person, the spouse, either because they love the gambler so much, or they're doing what as best as they know to deal with the situation, they're actually creating situations that enable the person to maintain the behavior. An example of that would be, a person goes out and they're caught up in gambling, and then they come home and they miss work because they came home and they're tired from a night out gambling, and they can't go to work the next day. They have slept in and they haven't called work to say that they're not coming in. Then the spouse would call the workplace to say, well, my husband or my wife is sick and so we cannot come in today. So making excuses for the person who is addicted is a way of enabling that behavior. It's a form of cover-up. A lot of times we find that some spouses are also manipulated into joining in the gambling behavior. And it's not that they want to do it, but that they're not strong enough. They don't have the assertiveness to say that I will not join you. So it's kind of sad to watch that you have some spouses who know that their partners are addicted to gambling, but they're learning to go into the casino. So let us go to the casino tonight. We're just going to go there. We're going to have just a dinner, and
it's a date night.
It's a date night. The date night is at the casino, and so they end up going to the casino, knowing fully well in the back of their minds that once they get there, that the gambling is going to play out, and they're going to come away from there feeling very bad about the decision that they have made. So a lot of times we find that the spouses of gamblers actually join them in the behavior. So you asked me the do's and the don'ts. So I think the major don't is that don't enable. If there's anything that you're doing to cover up or to support the person's behavior, if the person is out of money, don't encourage the person by paying off their debts, because what you're doing, if you pay off that debt, you're just creating more room on the credit card for them to gamble again.
Mm-hmm. And don't pay off their debt, and don't give them more money.
Right.
And because you're right, it's just going to create that vicious cycle of.
Absolutely.
And then I'm just thinking the person who's receiving that money, then you instill in them, I need to make more money so I can pay back my family. And you're again stuck in that circle of I got to win again,
Right.
I got to win again.
And this is not an easy place for the spouses of gamblers to be in, right? Because a lot of time you have joint debt together.
Exactly.
And you're trying to keep the finances from getting to a place of bankruptcy. So you're trying to help out by paying off the debt. So if you have a situation where you're paying off the credit card of someone who have used the credit card to gamble, and you still give that person access to the credit card, then what you're in fact doing is giving the gambler money to continue gambling. So there are spouses too who have been forced into signing for a second mortgage because the person needs to get the equity out of the house, because the person needs to have that equity to pay off debts that they have incurred for gambling. Now, by doing that, you're in fact giving that money to the person to continue gambling, because what is going to happen once you have paid off those debts is that they now have a new level of funds available. Let us say that you have used 100,000 of your equity to pay off the debt that was owing, and you give the person access to that to that amount. Then they now have 100,000 of fresh credit that they can use to start gambling again. So for spouses who are listening today and you are stuck in this cycle, it's very important that you realize and you assess your behavior to realize how you might be enabling the person to continue the addiction. And the other don't is don't lecture or blow up. I think it's best to look at this as a form of mental illness, that the person is not thinking about this thing rationally, that their brain has been rewired in a negative way that is causing them not to see the damage that they're causing to themselves and to their family by this kind of behavior. So a person who is thinking rationally and who has control over what they're doing would not make those kind of decisions. So it's best to look at it from that point of view. So no amount of lecturing that you're going to do is going to help this person to stop the behavior. And if you blow up and you become angry and you throw a temper tantrum and you threaten, this is not helping the person to stop the behavior. So what I would suggest instead, so I've looked at a few don'ts: don't enable, don't lecture, don't blow up. I would also say do get help and advice for yourself, because it's very, very important for you to get professional advice as to how to deal with the money that you have left in your account, how to deal with credit cards, what to do in order to protect those assets from being depleted. And I think it's also important to encourage the gambler to get help. So you need to get help and advice for yourself as the spouse who is going through this very difficult time, but it's also very important if you encourage the gambler to get help. And this creates a problem, because what often happens in this kind of a situation in a family is that there's a lot of secrecy around the fact that there's a gambling addiction, and the gambler would like you to keep that secret going.
Yeah.
So in other words,
well, some family members, exactly that. Maybe one part of the family knows this person's suffering from a gambling addiction, and the aunts and the uncles don't, or maybe a spouse doesn't even know. And so the secrecy can be really an issue when you're trying to tackle a problem. 'Cause
Absolutely.
if people don't know the problem's there, it's hard to get started on it.
And it puts the spouse the other spouse in a very tough position, because on one hand, you want to get help. You want to inform your pastor, for example, that there is a problem in your family, and use the pastor as a resource to help to get further help, or to talk with the person as an objective third party. But the person is resistant, because the person is feeling, if you do that, it's like you're betraying me, and so spouses become stuck because they feel, I can't do this. But the question I would ask is, would you prefer for your husband to be mad at you and you end up saving the marriage and the relationship, or you'd prefer to keep a secret and end up in the relationship being destroyed because the person just goes deeper and deeper and deeper into the addiction? So it's a weighing of consequences that has to happen, where you realize, yes, I'm going to go against what this person is telling me to do, but I'm not doing it to harm him or her. I am doing it out of love. I'm not doing it to embarrass. I'm getting the pastor involved because we need to deal with this issue. It's a cry for help. And so it's very important that secrecy be broken, and that that help be sought.
So we started touching a little bit there for the next steps for someone in getting help. We talked about breaking secrets, getting financial help, and some counseling. In terms of someone actually going through the process, what would a process of sort of sitting down with a counselor like yourself look like if someone's suffering from a gambling compulsion or addiction?
The first process would be to just get the person. You're talking about the gambler or the spouse? Either
or. The gambler, I guess, to start off with. What would it look like for them?
In the interest of the time that we have, I think I can only do one. So let me take the spouse, for example, as the spouse is normally the person that would come in. Would be, first of all, to get an assessment of the situation, to see how deep the family is in debt, what consequences it's happening. We'd also do assessment of behaviors to see whether or not there are enabling behaviors that are taking place. We do an assessment also of supporting of resources that the person has that they can tap into. Is there a relationship to a pastor, or their in-laws, or their person that this person respect that they can talk to about the gambling addiction of the person? And so as we begin to explore those things, then the next step would be to set up some kind of a plan as to how we can go about getting the other spouse involved, so that we can deal with the issue. So unfortunately, we have come to the end of today's broadcast, Melissa, but I think it's a very important topic, and I'm sure that someone out there is going through this issue, because it becomes very, very common as a result of the internet and the ease to which people can access gambling. So you've been listening to the Life Transformation Radio Show. I'm your host, Michael Hart of Elam Counselling Services, and the other voice you've been hearing is that of Melissa Wagon, and we have been discussing compulsive